At the height of ancient Greece, the balance of power seemed unshakable. For centuries, Sparta had ruled the battlefield with an iron grip. Its warriors were legends, its tactics the model for all others, and its name alone carried the weight of terror. Yet in the summer of 371 BC, on a plain near the small town of Leuctra in Boeotia, everything changed. In a single clash lasting only hours, Sparta's centuries of dominance came crashing down. And it happened not because of new weapons or superior numbers, but because of one man's brilliance, a tactical idea so simple, yet so transformative that it redefined the art of war for 1,000 years. This is the story of the Battle of Leuctra, and how Epaminondas of Thebes shattered the myth of Spartan invincibility. Imagine the year 371 BC. For more than 2 centuries, a single Greek city-state dominated the known military world. Its warriors were considered invincible. Its combat tactics were copied by all other armies, and its name alone was enough to make kings and generals tremble with fear. That city was Sparta, the most feared war machine of all antiquity. But on a single day at Leuctra, all of that changed forever. A battle lasting just a few hours destroyed 300 years of Spartan military supremacy and altered the course of Greek history. And most impressive of all, it was achieved through a tactical innovation so simple yet so ingenious that it changed the way wars would be fought for the next 1,000 years. This is the story of the Battle of Leuctra, where a general named Epaminondas deployed what might be called the first truly revolutionary secret weapon in military history. An innovation that relied not on new technology, new materials, or new weapons, but rather on an idea so brilliant it transformed ordinary soldiers into a force capable of shattering the most feared military formation of the ancient world. To fully understand the magnitude of what happened at Leuctra, one must first understand what made the Spartans so special. We are not just talking about well-trained soldiers or courageous warriors. The Spartans had created something that had never existed before in human history, a society entirely dedicated to war. From the moment they were born, Spartan boys were evaluated for their strength and military potential. Those deemed weak or defective were abandoned in the mountains to die. Those who survived this initial selection were taken from their families at the age of 7 and handed over to the state to begin the agoge, the most brutal and efficient military training system ever developed. For the next 13 years of their lives, these boys would know no comfort, luxury, or even enough to eat. They were deliberately kept hungry, so they would learn to steal food without being caught, developing stealth and courage. They slept outdoors, walked barefoot, and were forbidden to wear warm clothing even in the harshest winter. They were beaten regularly, not as punishment, but as training to endure pain. But the most important aspect of the agoge wasn't physical conditioning, however extreme. It was psychological conditioning. These young men learned that they didn't exist as individuals, but only as part of a greater whole. Their identity, their worth, their very existence had meaning only within the Spartan military formation. They didn't fight for personal glory, wealth, or conquest. They fought because fighting was literally their sole reason for existence. At 20, if they survived training, they became full soldiers. But even then, their lives remained devoted exclusively to war. They could not practice professions, could not engage in commerce, and could not even live with their wives until they were 30. Their sole function in Spartan society was to fight. The result of this system was a type of soldier the world had never seen before. The Spartans were not only technically superior, though they were the undisputed masters of the Phalanx formation. They possessed something far more valuable, a discipline and group cohesion that bordered on the supernatural. In battle, the Spartans moved as a single organism. Their spears swung in perfect synchrony, their shields aligned seamlessly, and when they marched, the sound of their feet striking the ground in unison was described by witnesses as resembling an approaching earthquake. But the Spartans' true secret weapon wasn't their individual technique or even their discipline. It lay in something much deeper. They simply didn't run. While other Greek soldiers might break and run when the battle became too intense, the Spartans remained in position until death. They had been conditioned from childhood to believe that death was preferable to dishonor and that abandoning formation was the greatest disgrace possible. This mentality created an interesting psychological phenomenon. The Spartans' enemies began battles already half defeated. They knew they were facing men who would not retreat, would not negotiate, would not surrender. It was like fighting a force of nature. The Spartan Phalanx formation became the foundation upon which Sparta's entire military power was built. The Phalanx was not a Spartan invention. Other Greeks used it as well, but the Spartans perfected it until it became the most devastating weapon of the ancient world. Imagine a wall of bronze and iron moving toward you. In the front ranks, soldiers with enormous shields, each covering half their own body and half the body of the man beside them. Behind them, row after row of long spears jutting forward like the quills of a giant porcupine. As this formation advanced, the spearheads of the rear ranks aligned with those of the front, creating an iron wall that extended several meters in front of the shields. The sound was terrifying. The metallic clang of hundreds of shields and spears clashing against each other as the formation moved, combined with the soldiers' war cries and the rhythmic thud of thousands of feet marching in perfect unison. Many enemies simply fled before physical contact even began. For those brave or foolish enough to face a Spartan phalanx, the reality was worse than expected. When two phalanxes clashed, the combat was something almost incomprehensible to modern minds. It wasn't individuals dueling. It was hundreds of men locked together, shoving and pressing in a suffocating mass. The front ranks could barely move their arms. Fighting was reduced to short dagger thrusts, spear jabs beneath shields, and relentless pushing. The men behind pressed forward with all their strength, trying to collapse the enemy line through sheer force. This form of combat completely favored the Spartans. Their discipline meant they held formation under the worst pressure. Their training allowed them to push harder and longer, and their mentality meant they never gave up. The outcome was predictable. Again and again, for centuries, the Spartan phalanx broke enemy lines. Once even a single wing collapsed, panic spread and battles turned into routs. For over 300 years, this formula worked flawlessly. Sparta dictated terms, imposed governments, and held unmatched authority across Greece. But the seeds of weakness were already sown. Their absolute reliance on the phalanx made them blind to innovation. Their society, built on exclusivity, left them with fewer and fewer full citizens to serve as soldiers. By the early 4th century BC, their numbers had dwindled dramatically. They filled their ranks with allies and mercenaries, men who lacked the discipline and spirit of true Spartans. Outwardly, they seemed invincible. Inside, they were hollowing out. It was in this moment that Thebes and Epaminondas rose. Thebes was no Sparta. It was a city of farmers and merchants, not warriors. But Epaminondas was no ordinary general. His education was broad: philosophy, mathematics, music, rhetoric, giving him the rare ability to think outside the rigid traditions of warfare. When he studied the Spartan phalanx, he did not admire it as others did. He dissected it, analyzing strengths and weaknesses with the mind of a mathematician. And he realized its greatest strength, its cohesion, was also its greatest weakness. Break it at a single point, and the whole machine could collapse. The problem was how to break it. The Spartans had distributed their strength evenly across the line. Every point was strong, and they prided themselves on being impenetrable. But Epaminondas had the vision to flip convention on its head. If the enemy was strong everywhere, then he would not fight everywhere. Instead, he would concentrate his best men at a single point, creating a local force so dense and overwhelming that even Sparta could not withstand it. This was the birth of the oblique formation. Traditionally, Greek phalanxes maintained uniform depth along the line. If the formation was 8 ranks deep, it stayed that way from one end to the other. But Epaminondas changed the rules. In the traditional methods of Greek warfare, armies faced each other in battle lines designed with symmetry. Each section of one army was matched in strength and depth to the corresponding section of its opponent, ensuring that combat across the line was evenly balanced. For centuries, this method had been the foundation of hoplite warfare. But Epaminondas, the Theban general, dared to challenge this orthodoxy. He recognized that symmetry, while orderly, often produced stalemates or predictable outcomes. His insight was that true victory required concentration of power at the decisive point rather than equal distribution along the line. Instead of maintaining the conventional formation of 8 to 10 ranks across the field, he massed the bulk of his forces into a single massive column, 50 ranks deep or more. This immense phalanx was positioned on the left wing of the Theban army, directly opposite the position where the Spartans always placed their finest warriors. The rest of his line was intentionally weakened. His center and right were ordered to hold back, advance slowly, and avoid heavy engagement for as long as possible. Everything depended on the left wing column breaking through the Spartan elite before the rest of the Theban army was overrun. To sharpen this strategy, Epaminondas introduced a new elite corps, the Sacred Band. This unit, composed of 300 soldiers carefully selected for their loyalty, skill, and courage, was placed at the head of the column. Their role was to meet the Spartan elite head-on and match them in valor and discipline. Yet the general's greatest contribution was not merely tactical. It was psychological. He understood that centuries of Spartan victories had created an aura of invincibility, and that overcoming this myth was as important as defeating them in combat. For weeks, Epaminondas trained his men relentlessly. He drilled them in the oblique formation until they could execute it flawlessly under pressure. He explained in detail how the strategy would unfold and reassured them that the Spartans, despite their fearsome reputation, were mortal soldiers bound by the same limitations as any other men. Slowly, he transformed their fear into confidence. When the day of battle came, his army was not only disciplined in movement, but also convinced in spirit that victory was possible. That opportunity arrived in the summer of 371 BC. Tensions between Sparta and Thebes had reached their breaking point. King Cleombrotus of Sparta marched north with a force that included not only Spartan citizens, but also troops from allied Greek city-states. To the Spartans, this campaign was routine. They had fought Thebes many times before and won easily. Their plan was the same as always: march into Boeotian territory, meet the enemy in open battle, and crush them with the traditional phalanx that had worked for centuries. But Epaminondas knew this was his one chance to alter history. If he failed, Thebes would be destroyed, and he would likely be executed. If he succeeded, he could break the iron grip Sparta held over the Greek world. The two armies finally met on the plain of Leuctra in Boeotia. The ground was flat and open, perfectly suited for phalanx combat. The Spartans arranged themselves in their customary formation, their elite citizens on the right wing, allies in the center, and additional allies on the left. It was a pattern they had repeated countless times, and it had always delivered victory. But when they looked across at the Theban army, something was different. Instead of a uniform line mirroring their own, the Theban left wing was packed with soldiers, forming an enormous column that towered in depth. The rest of the line looked thin and fragile. Spartan commanders were puzzled. Some dismissed it as a deployment error. Others believed it was a show of strength intended to intimidate. None of them realized they were witnessing the dawn of a revolutionary military principle: the concentration of force. As the battle began, the weakened Theban center and right advanced slowly, avoiding direct combat. The left wing, however, surged forward in full force. At the front, the Sacred Band collided with the Spartan elite. For the first time in generations, the Spartans met opponents who could match their ferocity blow for blow. Behind them, rank after rank of Theban soldiers pressed forward, adding irresistible weight to the attack. The Spartan formation was designed to endure balanced pressure across the line, not a hammer blow at a single point. At first, their discipline held. For a brief moment, it seemed as though they might resist the tide. But physics was against them. 50 ranks of Thebans pressing against 10 ranks of Spartans could not be held back indefinitely. Slowly, inexorably, the Spartan right wing began to give way. This moment was psychologically devastating. Spartan warriors were raised with the belief that they never retreated, that they would stand firm until death. Yet here, before the eyes of the Greek world, they were being physically pushed backward. The breaking point came when King Cleombrotus himself, fighting in the thick of the clash, was slain. His death tore not only a gap in the Spartan line, but also in their spirit. With their king fallen and the pressure unrelenting, the formation collapsed. The unthinkable followed. Spartan soldiers began to flee. What started as an orderly retreat dissolved into chaos. Panic spread across the battlefield, and the once invincible army of Sparta disintegrated before Theban eyes. Over 1,000 Spartans were killed, including 400 full citizens, a catastrophic loss for a society with such a small citizen population. But the significance of Leuctra went far beyond the casualty count. In a single day, Epaminondas shattered the myth of Spartan invincibility. News of the Theban triumph spread rapidly. Allies began to abandon Sparta, and long-suppressed enemies rose in rebellion. The balance of power in Greece shifted overnight. From a military perspective, Epaminondas' tactics became legendary. His principle of concentrating superior force at a decisive point was studied, copied, and eventually became a cornerstone of military strategy. The influence of his innovation echoed through the centuries. Alexander the Great would refine these tactics in his campaigns against Persia. Roman generals would adapt them to their legions. Medieval commanders would draw from the same principle in battles across Europe. Even in the modern era, from Napoleon to the generals of the Second World War, the idea remained unchanged. Overwhelming strength at the decisive moment can shatter even the most disciplined enemy. Epaminondas did not stop at Leuctra. Determined to end Spartan dominance permanently, he launched further campaigns deep into enemy territory. His boldest stroke came with the liberation of Messenia, a land whose people had been enslaved by Sparta for over 3 centuries. The Spartan economy relied entirely on this forced labor. Once Messenia was freed, Spartan citizens were forced to work their own land, leaving less time for military training. This marked the beginning of a downward spiral. With less training, their armies grew weaker. Weaker armies lost more battles, shrinking Spartan territory and resources. With fewer resources, they could no longer maintain a professional warrior class. Within a generation, the once mighty Sparta had fallen to the level of a minor power, unable to defend even its own homeland. Meanwhile, Thebes rose to become the dominant force in central Greece. Epaminondas continued to experiment with new tactics, integrating cavalry with infantry and pioneering formations that kept Theban armies at the forefront of military innovation for years. Observers from across the Mediterranean came to witness these strategies, carrying them back to their homelands. But beyond tactics, the true legacy of Leuctra was the lesson it offered to history. No power, no matter how dominant, is untouchable. No tradition, no matter how sacred, is beyond challenge. Innovation can overturn centuries of supremacy, but every innovation also carries within it the seeds of its own decline. As rivals studied and adapted to the oblique formation, its effectiveness diminished. The cycle of invention, countermeasure, and adaptation became a recurring theme in military history. The Battle of Leuctra was more than just a clash of armies. It was a turning point in the story of Greece, a moment when courage, innovation, and belief combined to overturn the seemingly eternal order. It showed that even the mightiest power can fall, and that bold ideas, when matched with preparation and conviction, can reshape the destiny of nations. After the death of Epaminondas in 362 BC, Thebes quickly lost its innovative edge. Without his genius, the city-state was unable to adapt to the changing realities of the Greek world. When Philip II of Macedon began his southern expansion, he brought with him a new wave of military innovations. While he had studied Epaminondas' tactics, Philip built upon them and went far beyond. His Macedonian phalanx was more flexible, fully integrated with cavalry maneuvers, and supported by advanced siege technology. At the Battle of Corinea in 338 BC, Thebes found itself in the very same position Sparta had once faced at Leuctra, confronted with superior tactics it had never seen before and was unprepared to resist. The irony was unmistakable. The very army that had once overthrown Spartan supremacy through innovation was now destroyed by even greater innovation. Yet, Epaminondas' legacy did not vanish. A young prince who fought at Corinea, Alexander of Macedon, studied his methods carefully. He embraced the principle of concentrating force at a single decisive point. Alexander's famous cavalry wedge, which broke the Persian lines at Gaugamela, was a direct application of Epaminondas' principle. Instead of spreading his cavalry evenly across the battlefield, Alexander massed them at one point to create overwhelming superiority. This continuity of tactical thinking illustrates how military ideas evolve. Each generation builds on the discoveries of the last, refining and adapting older concepts to meet new challenges. The Romans, who would later dominate the Mediterranean, also drew lessons from Epaminondas. Though they developed their own distinct system based on the legion rather than the phalanx, they adopted the principle of concentrated force. The Roman formation, known as the cuneus, was essentially a version of Epaminondas' attack column, adjusted to suit Roman tactics. Against particularly strong enemies, Roman commanders concentrated multiple cohorts at one point to break through, just as Epaminondas had done centuries earlier. Unlike the Spartans, however, the Romans understood the importance of flexibility. They adapted constantly, tailoring their methods to face new threats, whether Greek phalanxes, Gallic tribes, Hannibal's war elephants, or Parthian cavalry. The lessons spread beyond antiquity. During the Middle Ages, Charles Martel at Tours and William the Conqueror at Hastings both applied the principle of focusing strength at the decisive moment. Later, Napoleon Bonaparte elevated this concept to a grand scale, basing his strategy on arriving at the battlefield with superior numbers at the most critical place. His interline maneuvers were simply a large-scale extension of Epaminondas' tactics. Across centuries, the same truth echoed. It is better to be overwhelming at one point than evenly balanced everywhere. But Epaminondas' brilliance was not only tactical. He was also a leader who understood the psychology of his men. His soldiers entered the Battle of Leuctra not just with a plan, but with confidence. They believed in their commander and in the strategy they had rehearsed. This psychological preparation was as vital as the tactics themselves. Later, great generals, Alexander, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, all combined innovation with inspiration. They knew that even the greatest strategy would fail if soldiers lacked the morale to carry it out under pressure. The deeper lesson of Leuctra is that no military supremacy lasts forever. Sparta dominated for 3 centuries until one day of innovation ended its power. Thebes enjoyed only a brief ascendancy before being crushed by Macedon. Even Rome, which ruled for centuries, eventually collapsed as new enemies found ways to exploit its weaknesses. This cycle has repeated endlessly. In modern times, World War I saw old infantry tactics shattered by machine guns, artillery, and tanks. World War II introduced air power, radar, and nuclear weapons. Today, drones, cyber warfare, and satellite systems continue the same cycle of innovation and counter-innovation. And yet, despite the changing tools of war, the principles Epaminondas demonstrated at Leuctra remain timeless. The concentration of force, the need for flexibility, and the importance of morale. These lessons extend beyond the battlefield into every sphere of human endeavor. In business, science, and technology, success often comes to those willing to challenge convention and see opportunities where others see none. Epaminondas proved that even the mightiest systems have weaknesses. The Spartans appeared invincible until someone dared to think differently. His innovation didn't just change one battle, it changed the trajectory of history. Without his victory, Sparta might have continued its dominance, Macedon might never have risen, and Alexander's conquests might never have spread Greek culture across the known world. That ripple effect shaped Rome, Western civilization, and countless generations of strategy that followed. The true secret weapon of Leuctra was not bronze or iron. It was an idea. It was preparation, vision, and the courage to attempt what no one else dared. That is why the story of Epaminondas endures. It reminds us that no dominance is eternal, no advantage is permanent, and every status quo can be overturned by those willing to innovate.